Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist? The History of the British Overseas Territories, Part 1. So today we're going to look at the history of 6 of Britain's 14 overseas territories, specifically the territories in the Caribbean and Bermuda. I figured since I've already done several former British colonies in the Caribbean, I might as well talk about their current colonies in the Caribbean. So just what is an overseas territory of the United Kingdom? The United Kingdom itself is found on the British Isles. Outside the regular part of the United Kingdom are 14 overseas territories, with these overseas territories being colonized by the UK throughout its long history of colonialism. They have, for whatever reason, decided to remain connected to Britain. They are connected by having the Queen as a ceremonial monarch, giving citizens of the territory the option of British citizenship, and having a common market with the rest of the UK. However, they do have self-autonomy, with most having a parliament or local assembly of some sort, along with elections where citizens can voice their wants and concerns for their territory. Now, all territories do share something in common, besides, of course, being in the Caribbean. They all tend to have stereotypically Caribbean climates, are majority Christian, particularly Protestant Christianity, will speak English with an accent, apparently have really good rum, and a large black population. Economically, all islands have a heavy focus on tourism, along with being a tax haven. They also unfortunately tend to deal with political corruption, raging hurricanes or other tropical storms, and a relatively high level of either poverty or unemployment. With all that being said, let's move on to our first territory, the island of Montserrat. Montserrat is located in the Leeward Islands chain, with the countries of St. Kitts and Nevis and Antigua and Barbuda north of it, and the French territory of Guadeloupe south of it. The island was originally settled by the Arawak and then Carib people, before being wiped out by disease and Spanish raiding. The island will be settled in 1632 by Irish colonists who moved to the island fleeing persecution in Ireland itself and other British colonies. The Irish would have a lasting impact on the island, as most people on the island have at least some Irish in them. St. Patrick's Day is a public holiday, and Irish imagery is often seen on the island. The island's economy will be dominated by sugar plantations, worked at first by indentured servants before slave labor was brought in. Slaves would quickly make up a majority of the population, as more slaves were needed to continue to produce the labor-intensive sugar fields. Slavery would end in 1834, with the abolition of slavery across the British Empire. The island's economy would turn to producing key lime in the 1950s, which allowed small-scale farmers a greater say over the island's economy. Universal suffrage would come to the island in 1952, with William Henry Brabell's Labour Party dominating the country's politics. He would introduce great social reform on the island and move the economy towards tourism. However, disaster would strike the island in 1995. Montserrat, like many islands in the Lesser Antilles, is geologically formed from a volcano. Between 1995 and 1999, the Soufriere Hills volcano would erupt several times, forcing around 2/3 of the island's 12,000 residents to flee, and destroying much of the southern part of the island, including the capital Plymouth. Today, the southern half of the island is off limits, with nobody allowed in and less than 5,000 people inhabiting the island. The eruption would result in many government ministers to be called into question, especially since corruption has been a fairly common problem on the island. Today, the island is led by Eston Taylor Farrell of the Movement for Change and Prosperity Party. The next territory is the island of Anguilla and its surrounding islands. It is north of Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, and the island of St. Martin, and is east of the Vrigin Islands. The island was originally settled by the Arawak and then Carib people, before being wiped out by disease and Spanish raiding. The island would originally be settled by the Dutch in 1631, but they would flee just 2 years later due to Spanish attacks. In 1650, the English would arrive on the island, with most colonists coming from St. Kitts. The English colony during its early years would have to deal with raids from nearby powers, first from the Caribs from other islands in 1656, and then the French again in 1666, 1688, 1745, and 1790. 1745 would be the biggest battle for the island, with a force of 150 British militia ambushing and routing a force 5 times their size. The economy of the island was primarily slave-based, with blacks making up a majority on the island. Tobacco and sugar were produced, although the island's plantation economy never proved to be very profitable. Slavery would be abolished in 1834, and the economy began to shift towards salt mining. Anguilla during this time had a very small population, with there being several times since 1650 when the island became essentially depopulated due to raids or people leaving the island looking for greener pastures. Anguilla for most of its history will be linked with St. Kitts. St. Kitts was the closest British colony that had a large enough population to support itself, and many settlers had some sort of link to St. Kitts. But it became pretty apparent that many Anguillans didn't like being administered with St. Kitts. Anguillans found that St. Kitts was too far away from them and wanted greater self-autonomy. This would boil over in 1967. St. Kitts, along with the island of Nevis, wanted self-rule from the British and formed a partially independent state. This angered many Anguillans, as they believed if St. Kitts got its independence, Anguilla would become a colony of St. Kitts. On March 30th, 1967, the Kittian police force was expelled from the island, and the Anguillans asked America to annex Anguilla. The Americans refused, not wanting to create geopolitical strife in the Caribbean. I mean, come on. Everyone knows America only does that in Latin America, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. The Anguillans decided, after not being allowed to join America, to declare independence. This independence went unrecognized by most of the world, and wasn't really to get actual independence. They just wanted to not be under the rule of St. Kitts. So, in a strange way, they declared independence to remain a colony. In 1969, they were still de facto independent, with the British government unable to work out an agreement with the island. Anguilla declared independence again, and in a provocative move, a British MP was forced off the island at gunpoint. This would force the British Army to invade the island, although this invasion was completely peaceful, and Anguilla fell under British rule again. In 1971, it would be agreed that Anguilla will be separated from St. Kitts, and by 1980, the island was given full self-autonomy. Politically, the country is headed by Alice Webster, the head of the Anguillan Progressive Movement, a liberal political party. The country's economy is mainly based around tourism and fishing, with the island's population slowly starting to grow. Currently, a little under 15,000 people live there, with the largest settlement on the island being the capital, known as the Valley, which sounds like a city out of Lord of the Rings, so they have that going for it. Next, we go west to the British Virgin Islands. No, it is not called that because the island is full of Redditors, or people who believe that Godzilla will win in Godzilla vs. Kong, but rather because the islands were named after the Virgin Saint Ursula. The British Virgin Islands are west of Anguilla and east of the American Virgin Islands. The islands were originally settled by the Arawak and then Kara people, before being wiped out by disease and Spanish raiding. The Dutch would settle the island in 1615, setting up a series of tobacco plantations and forts in the island. The islands would be a flashpoint in Dutch-Spanish relations, with both powers fighting over the region for geopolitical control over the Caribbean. Dutch rule would come to an end in 1672, when the British took control of the islands in the Third Anglo-Dutch War. British rule would see a strange combination of pirates, Quakers, and plantation owners and their slaves live on the islands. Sugar would become the main export of the islands. Unrest would be fairly common, as many slaves refused to accept their conditions. Several slave revolts or plots would occur, starting in the late 1700s till the end of slavery in 1834. Even after slavery was over, many blacks on the island remained upset over both the slow progress of slavery ending and the lack of opportunity many found. Several riots would occur, with the largest occurring in 1853 when 2,000 protesters rioted in the capital road town, which sounds like a city out of Mad Max. The end of slavery would dramatically reduce the economic power of the islands, with many choosing to immigrate to other British territories to find better paying jobs. General discontent will lead to protests, eventually forcing autonomy for the islands in 1967. The islands would grow economically as a tax haven, with tourism and close economic ties with the U.S. Virgin Islands helping build its economic potential. Today, the population is believed to be around 30,000 people. The country politically is led by Andrew Fahey from the Virgin Islands Party, a conservative party. Next, we go northwest to the Turks and Caicos Islands. These islands are located right in the Lucayan archipelago, with the Bahamas just slightly northwest of the territory. South of the territory is the island of Hispaniola and the countries of Haiti and the Dominican Republic. The islands were originally settled by the Arawak people, and not the Carib people this time. They never got that far north, although they sadly will be wiped out by the Spanish and disease by the 16th century. The islands will begin to see settlement in 1681 by salt miners from Bermuda who found the salt industry on the island to be particularly lucrative. The Bermudians would also bring slaves with them to work either in the salt industry or on cotton plantations set up on the islands. Pirates would also frequently use the islands as a base of operations. Now it's important to note that the Turks and Caicos Islands weren't really under anyone's jurisdiction. They were British controlled, but there was no official colonial government on the island. This would all lead to the islands becoming disputed by settlers from Bermuda, who made up a majority of the population, and settlers from the Bahamas, who were of course very close by. The colonial governors would frequently clash over who held jurisdiction and could gain control of the lucrative salt industry on the island. Eventually, in 1819, after a hurricane devastated much of the islands and many Bermudians left, the Bahamas would gain full control of the islands. However, this wouldn't last long, as in 1848 the islands were given to the colonial Jamaican government after citizens of the Turks and Caicos petitioned to be removed under Bahamian control. They would remain with Jamaica until 1962, when Jamaica became independent and the islands became their own colony. The islands starting at this time would move from salt to tourism and offshore finance. Now, one unique aspect of the islands is its relationship to Canada. Since the early 1900s, there has been talk of merging the two together and making the Turks and Caicos the 11th province of Canada. The main proponents of the merger argue that the Turks and Caicos could act as Canada's Hawaii, and it would allow the islanders greater political autonomy under Canadian federalism. It almost happened in the 80s, but failed due to the Canadian government's focus on signing NAFTA. Today, some support still remains, but it does look unlikely. Self-autonomy in the 70s would see the Conservative People's Democratic Movement, or PDM, and the Social Democratic Progressive National Party, or PNP, fight for control of the islands, with each party winning on and off again elections. However, slowly as the years went by, corruption became more and more prevalent, and it became so bad in 2009, self-autonomy was suspended, as the premier of the islands used his position for economic gain and was accused of rape. Self-autonomy will be brought back in 2012, but corruption is still present in the country. Currently, the premier of the country is Charlene Cartwright Robinson from the PDM. However, she might not be premier for long, as on the 19th, or in other words 6 days after recording this video, they are going to be having an election, so we'll see what happens. Finally, the islands have around 43,000 people living in them, with a capital in Cockburn Town, which sounds like it belongs in... you know what? Never mind. Now, we go southwest to the Cayman Islands. These are located south of Cuba, northwest of Jamaica, and east of Mexico. Now, the Cayman Islands were never settled by anyone prior to colonialization. Several different explorers, pirates, and sailors all would visit the island, with slowly a small community starting to grow. It wouldn't be until 1670 when the islands were formally incorporated into the British Empire. While in the British Empire, they remained very close with Jamaica, with the island acting as a dependency of colonial Jamaica. The Cayman Islands economy was a mix of cotton production and turtle fishing. Much of the labor force would be slaves, although apparently only the island of Grand Cayman had slaves, while the remaining islands were slave-free. They would see abolition in 1834. The islands would remain close with Jamaica until 1962, when Jamaica became independent. While initially, many of the islanders wanted to become independent with Jamaica, one man, Roy Ironhorse, decided that the island should remain with Britain. He met with other Cayman lawmakers and argued that Jamaican rule would be bad for the island, pointing out that the islands could lose autonomy, they wouldn't have a navy to protect themselves from smugglers, and could find independence and economic drain. They would remain with the United Kingdom with increased self-autonomy. While pretty much all the territories are tax havens, the Cayman Islands would be the most tax haveny of the tax havens. Local legends actually say the islands was a tax haven starting in 1794, after they rescued the king's cousin from a shipwreck, although this is disputed. Regardless, the economy would boom, and today there are more businesses legally registered on the island than people. There are 100,000 businesses registered, but only 66,000 people. One building in the capital, Georgetown, is said to have over 15,000 businesses registered in it, and I saw numbers going as high as even 40,000. Also, the fact that the Cayman Islands have 66,000 people makes it the largest British overseas territory population-wise. The Cayman Islands are currently controlled by Alden Midlothian from the People's Progressive Movement, a social democratic party. Now let's end the video asking, why aren't any of these territories countries? Why aren't they independent? Well, all of them have a very small population. Only one can beat out another Caribbean country population-wise, and even then, just by 10,000 people. They don't have a large enough population, or even a large enough island, to support themselves economically. Many feel that if they left Britain, they would have to eke out a living on their own, which can make them vulnerable to environmental disasters or economic downturns. While they are with Britain, they have that security. Now, it's not impossible for these territories to become independent. Many of them have an independence movement on the island, or are proposing to join with another country. It's just that many people in the territories don't want change right now, and see the benefits of staying with Britain outweighing the drawbacks. So yeah, that's the history of 5 British overseas territories. Originally, I was going to include Bermuda. I think I mentioned that in the intro, but I'm kind of busy with school, so I decided that I would just save that for another video. I've been busy reading about the memoirs of Russian serfs in my college classes. Admittedly, not the most exciting thing in the world. So I think the next video is going to be Belarus. I'm not sure when that's going to come out. It'll probably honestly be a while, just because I have a lot of stuff to do for school. But I'll try to get it out as fast as I can. And then after that, I'll probably talk about some more British overseas territories. I'll then do Belgium, and then Belgian political parties, and then I'll do Belize, and then I'll finish up with the British overseas territories. But yeah, that's the video. I hope you enjoyed. You can email me at whydocountries.exist@gmail.com for your thoughts, comments, suggestions, or hate mail. Thank you, take care, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.